The government, in compliance with the Constitution, was to either issue a white paper and publishing the report, or if it was not interested in publishing the report, to issue a statement in the national media and to explain why it was not going to publish the report. This white paper is what is now bringing all the controversy. So let's start with you. As the commission says, it is the chief of staff that gave them all the facilities, the support, everything it needed to do its work and execute in an excellent manner. So they had commendations for the chief of staff. That's where you are coming from. Why is government accepting and rejecting portions of the report?
Well, thank you very much, Samson. Let me say good morning to your cherished listeners and viewers. And to begin very quickly by reiterating government's commendation of the commission and its members for the work they did. The members of the commission chaired by Mr. Emil Short, Professor Richard Mensa Bonsu, who was my criminal law lecturer, Mr. P.K. Achampong, former Inspector General of Police. These are eminent citizens of our country, well respected, astute in their own right, and government continues to thank them for their work. Secondly, Samson, it's also important to place it in context that reports of commissions of inquiry, findings and recommendations of commissions of inquiries are subject to scrutiny by the government. I think in the wisdom of the framers of our constitution, when a commission of inquiry is set up, which is essentially a fact-finding inquiry, when their findings and recommendations are made, the government is vested with the authority or mandate to review the report, particularly the findings and recommendations, accept those it finds appropriate, and reject those it finds inappropriate or unable to accept for stated reasons. And Samson,
and I want you guys to take note. He says the government is mandated to review. So take note of that when we shall ask that question. Sure. Please proceed.
The government has the mandate, the constitutional mandate, to review the findings and recommendations of the report. And I will add very quickly that in doing so, you have had the benefit of the report. We have had the government has had the benefit of the report, the entire evidence adduced before the commission, the exhibits which were tendered before the commission, and the totality of the materials which the commission had. The government has had the benefit of that. And so the government, if you want, sits in a chair of having all the materials which the commission relied upon to come to its conclusions, to review the findings of the commission and make its mind as to accepting or rejecting the findings and recommendations of the commission.
So help us to understand. The government's, and I quote, the fundamental response of government to the findings of the report is that the report failed to address the first and most critical of the terms of reference of the commission, which was, quote, to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry into the circumstances of and establish the facts leading to the events and associated violence that occurred during the Ayawaso West Wuogon by-elections on the 31st day of January 2019, unquote. The failure to do so disables government from accepting in whole the findings of the commission. Some of the findings are accepted by government, whereas others are rejected. Reasons for government's position have been assigned in the white paper. So this is damning, that government's response fundamentally, very damning, fundamentally is that they did no job, because the most important and critical term, this government's words, most important and critical term is to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry. They say the report failed to address that.
Well,
justify that.
Those are your words, but even
they are not my words. They are the government's words.
But those are your inference and deductions from that position of government, that government has damned the work of the commission, or that they did no work. No. Government has accepted some of the recommendations and findings. Government has rejected some. The first and most important term of reference of the commission, which was to establish the facts leading to the events of 31st January 2019, in the view of government, that has not been dealt with.
If they failed, then they failed.
They failed to deal with that term.
If they could not deal with that term,
but that is
then they did no job.
Those are your words. Now, I will be coming to the reason why government took that position. But very quickly, I was just establishing the point that reports of Commission of Inquiries, findings and recommendations have been rejected in the past. And I give you an example of the Justice Jamafi Commission of Inquiries report, where very far-reaching fundamental recommendations were made, such as, for instance, that the minister should refund some amount of money, and white paper which was issued by the then government categorically. I'll be very happy. I see that Joy FM is done. If we're a listing of those recommendations which were accepted and rejected and given a percentage, you probably should go and take the Jamafi report, check how many recommendations were rejected, how many were accepted, take the Waku Commission report, check how many recommendations were accepted, how many were rejected, and you'll be surprised. I mean, colossal sums of money were asked to be refunded to the state. The government categorically, I'll give you an example, government does not accept, at page 15 of the white paper on the Jamafi report, government does not accept the
report, as you may know, was about that embarrassing outing we did for the Brazil. Yes.
Where there was a categorical recommendation, in that case also by eminent citizens, in my view, Justice Jamafi himself and as Chief Judge, Mr. Fuamani, a lawyer of good standing and all of that. And government said, government does not accept the recommendation that the former Minister for Youth and Sports, Honorable Evese Free Ankra, refund the amount of 15,000 Ghana cedis reported as spent, goes on, an amount of 577,500 United States dollars was asked to be refunded to the public exchequer by the then president of the GFA. Government rejected. And I have done the work you did. If you go through, you will see that a substantial portion of it.
At the time, we went through this same sort of arguments. And I'm sure if we did a playback, we'll hear what you had to say about what government did on its own commission. Now, we have to deal with your commission.
Let's deal with that.
Tell us why.
Let's deal with
you have
that.
done what you have done.
Now, Samson, let me also make the point. And you know better. Commissions of inquiries, their historical and conceptual underpinnings are fact-finding. I mean, the government or the state, an event occurs, and the government wants to unravel the facts behind it and says, go into it for us. And the Commission of Inquiry goes into it. Ghana 50 Commission of Inquiry is another example when PNN and Rekubebe and Co. were arraigned before court, and the court said, you cannot use the report of a Commission of Inquiry as a basis for prosecution because essentially it's a fact-finding mission and so on and so forth. But it's also important for us to recognize that in the wisdom of the framers of our Constitution, the framers of the Constitution itself had also said, one, that when the recommendations are made, and it is stated clearly, I think in Article 281C, that the Commission has to furnish reasons leading to the conclusion stated in the report. That's one. Two, that the government may choose to publish the report with the associated white paper. Three, that the government may choose not to, and if it doesn't, it has to give reasons for. And the white paper clothes the government with authority, and indeed the legal authority supporting that proposition are bound, that the government is clothed with authority to accept or reject the recommendations.
That's not in the Constitution.
Not in the Constitution, but it's clearly established by case law that the government has authority to accept or reject, and the legal implications thereof. Now, what we can interrogate here is the reasons given for the rejection.
Exactly, that's the question I asked.
Yeah, and I'm saying to you, for instance, on the first term of reference of the commission, which the government takes the position that it was not dealt with. Samson, when you take a look at the white paper, and I hope that all of us have taken pains to critically examine
we have it, and let's be referencing it as much as we can.
Examine the reports and the white paper. You will see that government took pains to examine and review the entire evidence before the commission, and went as far as lifting portions of the evidence which were on record, which had been presented to the government, to make its case on each of the recommendations rejected or accepted. Even in some cases, recommendations that had been accepted in part, government is taking pains to deal with them. Now, let me give you an example. The commission at paragraph 1.6 on page 42 of the report stated as follows, and I quote, "The commission further finds that the SWAT team, which was deployed to the electoral grounds of the Labaoleshi School polling station grounds in complete disregard of the officially laid down electoral security arrangements, were officers of the National Security Establishment," end quote. You go to paragraph 1.8, and the same commission finds, and I quote, "The commission further finds that these men were deployed to follow up on intelligence to the effect that certain arms and ammunition stored in the warehouse within the constituency and to intercept and retrieve same." So by the second quote that I've just read out, which is paragraph 1.8, you will agree with me that the commission finds that the deployment was to follow up, or to follow up in their own ways, on intelligence to the effect that certain arms and ammunition stored in a warehouse within the constituency and to intercept and retrieve same. Now, when you go further, you will see also in the evidence adduced before the commission, that the commission came to the conclusion that a vigilante group associated with the National Democratic Congress, the Hawks, had been bussed to the vicinity. It is clear, I'm not making it up. It's right here.
I don't remember reading bussed, but because of the presence of one gentleman who
I'm not quoting.
Who they say his quoting. Presence clearly showed that the Hawks would have been present.
I'm not quoting. Yeah. I'm not quoting. That's why I use the word bars.
Okay.
But I'm saying that the commission, the evidence adduced before the commission, thoroughly analyzed by the commission and accepted by the commission, was to the conclusion that, and in their words, let me just stay off paraphrasing. In their own words, I quote, "The commission finds that by his presence at that location, at a time when elections were taking place, a strong suspicion of the presence of the Hawks was raised."
Great.
There you go. In fact, the commission itself poses a question. Were the Hawks present that day? And it goes on to answer that question.
Yes, they do. Answer it.
Every one of the injured persons admitted having heard of the group, the Hawks. Though one claimed not to know, I think they wanted to, one claimed not to know anything more than that. In this regard, the presence of Theophilus Sedodi, a man of unusually great physique and impossible to miss, even in a crowd, was of some significance. This person, who is described on the internet as the leader of the Hawks, a militia group associated with the National Democratic Congress, was formally inaugurated at the Unity Walk of the National Democratic Congress in Kumasi. And interestingly, President Mahama led that Unity Walk. Continue. Sedodi denied before the commission that he was a member of the militia group, the Hawks. He admitted being the person photographed on the day the Hawks group was reported to have been inaugurated in Kumasi, wearing a black T-shirt embossed with the head of a hawk on the top left-hand side. His explanation of how he came to be wearing that T-shirt that day was unconvincing. And he goes on and on. On 31st January, his presence at the frontage of the parliamentary candidate's residence, and don't forget, I've just referred you to a finding of fact by the commission who says that the SWAT team had been deployed to follow up on intelligence that ammunition had been stockpiled in a location in that constituency.
Right.
And the commission proceeds. The Hawks, he was positively identified by Akomia of the SWAT team.
And Akomia is double, the guy you heard a lot about.
Yes, double. So I'm establishing the nexus. I'm establishing the nexus.
The mobile phone seller term security
has been present in the restive crowd at the frontage of the parliamentary candidate's house that morning, leading to his subsequent chase and arrest by the SWAT team. And then the commission concludes. The commission finds that by his presence at the location at a time when elections were taking place, a strong suspicion of the presence of the Hawks was raised.
Right.
Now, if you read the executive summary or even read just the report, you will not find this. If you read the executive summary as in the findings, you will not find this portion that I've read out. You have to go and read the analysis of the evidence to find this.
You are reading this under what heading? of the report?
This must be under the analysis of the evidence. If you go to the report, the analysis of the evidence, this evidence.
No, I'm inviting you to go and pick where it is coming from, so that we all know that that's
no
what you're
problem.
saying.
No, don't worry. That's at paragraphs 1.2 to 1.22 on pages 34 and 35 of the report.
Right, and it comes under what heading?
Let me check it for you, please.
Yeah.
Where is it? It's here.
Okay, this. Okay.
This is the report.
Okay.
Page 34.
Right. Okay, so.
So if I may conclude, so essentially in answering something, I'm seeking.
Sorry.
No.
Yes.
Assessment of evidence.
Yeah, assessment of evidence.
No, wait.
Yes, correct.
Great.
So this was evidence adduced, accepted, and assessed by the commission.
Great.
And in the assessment of the evidence, the commission comes to some conclusions. So this is the point we have made, which is that the facts which led to the events of 31st January 2019 was, in our view, in the view of the government, one, that the national security apparatus had picked intelligence, that ammunition had been stockpiled.
Intelligence with the commission comes to a conclusion was at best of unreliable quality.
Which the government has commented on.
Okay.
Which we have commented on.
All right.
And which is I'm answering
Proceed
the question.
with the point, yeah.
I'm answering the question you asked about why we took the view that the first and most critical term of reference of the commission was not resolved, if you want. Which is the point I'm making. And if you want, I probably should begin with what our position as to.
So your problem is that this is an assessment they made. You are happy with the assessment. However, the assessment should have found itself on some pages of the report, and it was not there.
No, more than that. That when you take the evidence before the commission, and I don't want to be boxed into a position of, if you want, something that smacks of running down the commission or attacking the work of the commission, or coming to the conclusion that government entirely is against the work of the commission in totality. Because they are very far-reaching and fundamental findings and recommendations of the commission which were accepted by the government.
Nobody can say government is entirely against it.
Because the report you have pinned me down on one particular issue.
Right.
And which is what I'm trying to establish. And that point is that when you take the evidence before the commission, you take the evidence accepted by the commission, some of the findings of the commission itself, and you take the totality of all of that, the conclusion is that the facts which led to the events of 31st January 2019 were that, one, there were stockpile of ammunition and arms in the location of Ayawa's West Wagon, where by-elections were being held.
That was established?
No, that was established.
No,
not established that they were, that they followed up on intelligence. Not established that they, in fact,
is the intelligence of unreliable quality.
Which is what we are quarreling with. And if you allow me to
no
finish.
arms were found or retrieved.
No problem. Nobody says so.
Okay.
No one says so. But I'm saying that there was that intelligence.
Great.
That if you take the evidence adduced before the commission about the Hawks, if you take other pieces of evidence, if you put all of that together, the facts which led to the events of 31st were that intelligence had been picked, that intelligence was actionable, and which resulted in the deployment of legitimate official national security operatives, contrary to what the national chairman of the NDC had told all of us. And I see that, you should pay attention to that too. I mean, that is also very fundamental, that the chairman of a party says that people of unknown armed vigilantes wearing national security uniform brought from invincible forces had been deployed into a constituency, that 10 of them per polling station, 100 polling stations means 1,000 of them, the commission finds that indeed there were no disturbances in any of the polling stations. Right. They said it was close to the police, but not in the police. So essentially, the national chairman was not accurate. Sam George, member of parliament for Ningo Pram Pram, had said categorically that someone had been shot and killed in his own house. The commission is turned out not to be accurate. And that deployment to follow up on that actionable intelligence is what led to the events of 31st January 2019. Actionable intelligence which required action by national security operatives. So if you can get to the bottom of this for me, because as I read, my question to you is it your case that this assessment is not part of the commission's report, or that even though it is part of the commission's report, it ought to have been given a certain significance that it was not giving? That's why you are fighting the commission on this. The latter is correct. The weight placed on this evidence little weight was placed on this evidence.
Okay.
And that if the proper, appropriate weight was placed on this evidence, the commission would have found clearly that the intelligence which the national security outfit acted upon was credible intelligence, was intelligence of quality, was actionable intelligence, which indeed is the bedrock or the foundation precipitating the events of 31st January 2019.
All right. Now that's clearly understood. Please proceed to your next other ground of disagreements.
Well, not necessarily disagreements. I mean, so that is one of the areas
disagreements are fair.
I hear you.
And disagreement is used rather, what you use here is reject, not disagreement. You reject.
Yeah, exactly. Which is actually the language that white papers normally adopt. Now, and I've been making the point, Samson, that we have to look at the Commission's report in its totality, situate it in the context of the events of 31st January 2019. And I've been making the point about some of the statements which were categorically made, or allegations or claims which were made by leading members of the opposition. I see that my friend, Honorable Sam George, is so livid and has been writing all sort of statements and quoting the Bible to the president and the rest. But again, something, he should be consulting you, because you will find also in the report that very damning adverse findings have been made against him. Member of Parliament, an honorable member of Parliament, whom the Commission found very clearly that he had asserted.
And let's not use that adverse finding has been made against somebody lightly. Let's point to where exactly it is, because this is the consequence of adverse findings by a report. When there is an adverse finding made against you by a commission of inquiry, upon the expiration of 6 months, preceding after the white paper or publication has been done, that report becomes a judgment of the High Court, and you can only appeal to the Court of Appeal. If you don't take steps to reverse it, or you are unable to reverse it, you cannot be an MP, you cannot contest to become a president. It is very damning. So when you point to, you say adverse finding, please take us there. Don't say it.
That's why I say you should consult you. Because
the appeal is as of right.
Yes, as of right.
Within 3 months.
Within 3 months.
But that's why I say you should consult you, because I'm not too sure.
Okay. All right. So you know what? Do this for me. Do this for me. Just hold on.
Yeah.
Go over what you're about to present. Hold on. Wait.
Okay.
Go over what you're about to present. And when I return, we'll hear you. I want to go to the phone lines and speak to John in Debugre. He's a lawyer and former MP. He's played many roles as a citizen, and now obviously a senior citizen. Thank you very much for joining us, John in Debugre. Okay, we lost him. Okay, so he's been making some very, very interesting comments. You know, there was a recommendation for the reprimand of the minister, Brian Echampong, on the basis that that's the Minister of State who is at the National Security, that because he had ultimate responsibility, he should get a reprimand. The government rejects that completely. Thank you very much for joining us, John in Debugre. Oh, we lost him again. We will get him. When we do, we'll let him justify why he says he should be prosecuted instead of just being reprimanded. Yes, go to your next point.
So something I've just been saying that perhaps Honorable Sam George should be consulting, because
should be consulting a lawyer.
Yeah, a lawyer. I have no position as to whether or not this is adverse. I mean, but it's a serious matter that he needs to interrogate, because if you look at paragraph 2.15 on page 40 of the report, the commission makes this finding, and this was a finding in response to an assertion he made.
And he made
passionately in the words of the commission, which the commission makes a definite finding of fact on it. And I quote, he said, "We find as a fact that this unit was set up between 2010 and 2012. It is thus and true that this unit was set up under the current MPP administration that took office in January 2017. Although Honorable Sam George asserted with conviction, if I even use words than passion actually, conviction, that the unit did not exist at the time he served in government at the office of the president, he was clearly mistaken because it did. Perhaps it may be their special uniforms that are new, but certainly not their existence. Quote. Now, I take note of the usage of the word mistaken. That is where the issue is. I mean, if the commission had, for instance, said he told a lie or that it's, or even if it's untrue, it still becomes contentious. But the point I'm making is that he testified on oath, number one. Number two, he made that categorical assertion on conviction that this SWAT team never existed under the previous administration. It was set up suddenly to unleash violence on the Ghanaian people. And never forget something. You have to situate it in the context of the claims and the allegations, which is indeed, amongst others, what caused public and national outrage in our country. What is happening? That we are told that a certain unknown armed men, vigilante groups from the Invincible Forces have been unleashed onto Ghanaians. Akufo-Addo and his government is set up a certain militia group and so on.
In the light of this statement and the conclusions, the finding as made by the commission, that this assertion he made with conviction is untrue, and that at best he was mistaken. You want to say that they ought to have elevated this because they have come to the point that he spoke on truth. And speaking on truth on oath means you are committing the crime of perjury.
That's right. That's right.
And so they should have elevated that. They didn't do that. For saying mistaken, you disagree. That's the point.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not even, I'm not disagreeing, or I don't have much difficulty. I'm just raising the legal implications as you
are raising rightly, because you have an issue. What is your issue?
My issue is that this finding of fact against Sam George potentially constitutes an adverse finding by a commission of inquiry.
And the commission should have stated so.
It would have been, it would have been more welcoming if the commission had expressly stated so in their, but it still doesn't take away the fact that they found so.
All right.